Language is one of the things that makes us human. No other animal species has anything like the capacity we have for communicating with each other. What's more, we can and do have the ability to communicate with each other in many different ways. Some of these ways, such as speech, we can learn without formal instruction, whereas other ways require us to spend many years at school learning to do, such as reading and writing. Understanding how these modes of communication work has a wide range of applications, ranging from understanding how and why language disorders occur to developing speech technology. Typically, the following 4 qualities define language. Number 1, discreteness. These are the small units or sounds that we use to communicate words. When combined, they help us to communicate ideas. Grammar. This is the system of rules that govern how we combine individual sounds and/or word units. Productivity. This is the ability to produce an unlimited number of communications from these sounds and/or words units. And displacement. This is the ability to talk about something either in the past, the future, or as an abstract idea, for example, fiction. Animal communication systems use some of these features of language, but not all 4. For example, bees are able to communicate the location of a food source and its quality. There's been a long debate between theories regarding language and thought, which in turn has seen the emergence of 2 brands of theories, linguistic relativity and linguistic determinism. There is a YouTube video to explain those 2 theories. Aphasia. How many words we know depends on how we define what a word is. Example, are dog, dogs, and dogged different words? However, under each and every definition, we have a huge repository of vocabulary consisting of more than 50,000 words. In addition, we can access these definitions very quickly, with retrieval taking just a few hundred milliseconds if necessary. Given how automatic language is, we must organise all these words for efficient and prompt retrieval to take place. This mental lexicon, or store of words, is presumed to have different methods of organisation, such as semantic, which is the meaning of the word, syntactic, which is how the word is combined with other words, and word form, which is how we say or write the word. In order to try to prove this, we can look at anatomical data from people who have damage to specific areas of the brain. Aphasia is the umbrella term for this kind of damage that has an impact on language. Aphasia is an impairment of language affecting the production or comprehension of speech and the ability to read or write. Aphasia is always due to injury to the brain, most commonly from a stroke, particularly in older individuals. But brain injuries resulting in aphasia may also arise from head trauma, from brain tumours, or from infections. 2 of the most common types of aphasia are Wernicke's aphasia, which is a type of fluent aphasia, and Broca's aphasia, which is a type of non-fluent aphasia. They have been described by 2 people suffering from either type in 2 videos. The dual route cascaded model of reading and dyslexia. Early research on single word reading, principally with neuropsychological patients who suffered particular impairments in reading, have led to the hypothesis that there are 2 routes to reading single words: the direct access route and the indirect access route. Later research, which used experiments and computational modelling to test these theories, supported this hypothesis. Passer and Smith e-text. Language has been called the jewel in the crown of cognition and the human essence. Much of our thinking, reasoning, and problem solving involves the use of language. Language is a system of symbols and rules for combining these symbols in ways that can generate an infinite number of possible messages and meanings. To most of us, using our native language comes as naturally as breathing, yet using language actually involves ongoing integration of a host of complex skills. Psycholinguistics is the scientific study of the psychological aspects of language, such as how people understand, produce, and acquire language. Before delving into these topics, let's consider some functions of language. Adaptive functions of language. According to anthropologists, the human brain probably achieved its present form some 70,000 years ago, yet it took another 35,000 years before lifelike paintings began to appear on cave walls, and another 12,000 years before humans developed a way to store knowledge in the form of writing. These time lags tell us that thought and language depend on more than the brain's physical structure. Although the brain may not have physically evolved much over the past 50,000 years, human cognitive and linguistic skills clearly have. Some evolutionary theorists believe that language use evolved as humans adopted a more socially oriented lifestyle and formed larger social units. As the social environment became more complex, new survival problems emerged, such as the need to create divisions of labour and cooperative social systems, to develop social customs and communicate thoughts, and to pass on knowledge. Language made it easier for humans to adapt to these environmental demands. It's no coincidence, then, that every human culture has developed language, and the human brain seems to have an inborn capacity to acquire at least one of any of the roughly 5,000 to 6,000 languages spoken across the globe. We have evolved into highly social creatures who need to communicate, and we have the physical characteristics, example, a highly developed brain, the FOXP2 gene, a vocal tract, to do so in the most flexible way known, through language. Language underlies so much of what we do that it's almost impossible to imagine functioning without it. Conscious thinking often takes the form of inner speech. Through language, we can share our thoughts, feelings, goals, intentions, desires, needs, and memories with other people. Language is also a powerful learning mechanism. To get somewhere new, you don't have to drive or walk aimlessly. Instead, you can ask for directions, Google a map, or listen to your GPS device. Through storytelling, books, instruction, mass media, mobile technology, and the internet, language puts the knowledge accrued over generations at your fingertips. Properties of language. What captures your attention first when someone uses a foreign language that you don't speak? How different it sounds or looks when written, or simply how incomprehensible it seems? Yet what is striking around the world's languages is not their differences, but their underlying similarities. Across the globe, there are 4 properties essential to any language: symbols, structure, meaning, and generativity. We will also describe a 5th property, displacement. Language uses sounds, written characters, or some other system of symbols, example hand signs, to represent objects, events, ideas, feelings, and actions. The symbols used in any given language are arbitrary. For example, the Spanish, French, and German word for dog are perro, chain, and hund, respectively. Nothing about how any of these words look or sounds makes it intrinsically correct for representing the concept of dog. In English, Gurk, wolf, professor, or other words could be used to represent what we call a dog, but they aren't, even though no professors allowed on the lawn has a certain ring to it. Regardless of how the word dog came into being, it is an agreed on meaning. The same holds true for all other words we use. Language also has a rule-governed structure. A language's grammar is the set of rules that dictates how symbols can be combined to create meaningful units of communication. Thus, if we ask you whether zipfulrovg is an English word, you will almost certainly say no. Why? Because it violates a rule of the English language. 5 consonants, Z, P, F, L, R, cannot be put into an unbroken sentence. Likewise, if we ask you whether bananas have sale for I is an appropriate English sentence, you will say no, it should read, I have bananas for sale. In this case, bananas have sale for I violates a portion of the English grammar called syntax. Syntax is the rules that govern the order of words. Even if you can't verbalise the grammatical rules violated in this example, you know them implicitly. The grammars of all languages share common functions, such as providing rules for how to change the present continuous tense, I am walking the dog, into the past tense, I walked the dog, or a negative, I didn't walk the dog. Yet just as symbols, example words, vary across languages, so do grammatical rules. In English, for example, we say green salad and big river, which follow the rule that adjectives almost always come before nouns. They modify. In French and Spanish, however, adjectives often follow nouns. Salade verte, so salad green, and Rio Grande, so river big. Although language changes over time, with new words and phrases appearing regularly, they need to conform to the basic rules of that language. Language conveys meaning. Once people learn the symbols and rules of a language, they can form and then transfer mental representations to other people. Thus, you can tell a friend about your courses, favourite foods, feelings, and so on. Your friend will then extract meaning, hopefully your intended meaning, from what you've said. But understanding semantics, which is the meaning of words and sentences, is a tricky business, particularly when idioms are involved. For example, when you ask a friend, "How did you do on the test?" and the reply is, "I nailed it," you know that your friend is not saying, "I hammered the test to the desk with a nail." Someone familiar with English knows not to interpret this expression literally. Someone just beginning to learn English might find this idiomatic expression perplexing. Language is generative and permits displacement. Generativity means that the symbols of language can be combined to generate an infinite number of messages that have novel meaning. The English language, for example, has only 26 letters, but they can be combined into more than 500,000 words, which in turn can be combined to create a virtually limitless number of sentences. Thus, you can create and understand a sentence like, "Why is that sparrow standing underneath my pancake?" even though you are unlikely to have ever heard anything like it before. Displacement refers to the fact that language allows us to communicate about events and objects that are not physically present. You can discuss the past and future, as well as people, objects, and events that exist or take place elsewhere. You can even discuss imaginary situations such as a sparrow standing underneath the pancake. The structure of language. Psycholinguists describe language as having a surface structure and a deep structure. Language also has a hierarchical structure in which smaller elements are combined into larger ones. Let's examine these issues. Surface structure and deep structure. When you read, listen, or produce a sentence, its surface structure consists of the symbols that are used and their order. As noted earlier, syntax provides the rules for ordering words properly. In contrast, a sentence's deep structure refers to the underlying meaning of the combined symbols, which returns us to the issue of semantics. Sentences can differ in the surface structure, but have the same deep structure. Consider 1. Sam ate the cake. 2. The cake was eaten by Sam. 3. Eaten by Sam the cake was. So each of those was the surface structure, but we understand the deep structure, which is the meaning of each sentence. So each sentence conveys the same underlying meaning. Notice that the third was incorrect syntax. English isn't spoken this way, except perhaps by the fictional Star Wars character Yoda. Still, its meaning is clear enough. Sometimes a single surface structure gives rise to two deep structures, as occurs when people speak or write ambiguous sentences. Consider, "The police must stop drinking after midnight." This sentence could mean that police officers need to enforce a curfew to prevent citizens from drinking alcohol after midnight, or it could mean that if police officers go out for drinks after work, they need to finish their drinking by midnight. So that one sentence, or that one surface structure, has two deep structures, so two underlying meanings. At times, people intentionally use words or phrases to create a double entendre, which is French for double meaning, to convey two possible deep structures, one of which is often socially inappropriate. For example, in the movie The Silence of the Lambs, serial killer Hannibal Lecter tells FBI agent Clarice Starling, "I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner." The phrase "having an old friend for dinner" normally elicits only a single deep meaning, but because Lecter is Hannibal the cannibal, who eats his victims after killing them, the phrase was intentionally used to convey a second, more sinister deep structure. In everyday life, when you read or hear speech, you are moving from the surface structure to deep structure, from the way a sentence looks or sounds to its deeper level of meaning. In contrast, when you express your thoughts to other people, you must transform deep structure, which is the meaning that you want to communicate, into a surface structure that others can understand. The hierarchical structure of language. The most elementary building block of human language is the phoneme, the smallest unit of speech sound in a language that can signal a difference in meaning. So the phonemes are basically the sounds. Humans can produce about 100 phonemes, including the clicking sounds in some African languages, but no language uses them all. Some languages employ as few as 15 phonemes, and others more than 80. English uses about 40 phonemes consisting of vowel and consonant sounds, as well as certain letter combinations such as th and sh. Thus, sounds associated with th, and t can be combined to form the 3-phoneme word that. Phonemes have no inherent meaning, but they alter meaning when combined with other elements. For example, the phoneme D created a different meaning from the phoneme L when it precedes og. For example, dog versus log. At the next level of hierarchy, phonemes are combined into morphemes. They are the smallest units of meaning in a language. Thus, dog, log, and ball are all morphemes, as are prefixes and suffixes such as pre, un, ed, and else. So an S is a morpheme because it's plural, and that's the meaning. If you add an S to something, it's a plural. It's not a syllable. Thus, the word fans has 1 syllable but 2 morphemes. In every language, rules determine how phonemes can be combined into morphemes. English's 40 phonemes can be combined into more than 100,000 morphemes. Another example is cat. Cat has 3 phonemes, k, a, t. Cracker has 5, k, a, k is one, is another one. Cherry trees have 3 morphemes. Cherry, that has a meaning because it's a fruit. Tree, that has a meaning because it's a plant. And the S has a meaning because it's a plural. But it has to be attached to something, not just an S on its own. So morphemes, in turn, are the stuff of which words are formed. English morphemes can be combined into over 500,000 words, words into countless phrases, and phrases into an infinite number of sentences. Thus, we have a 5-step language hierarchy, beyond which lies the 6th and most comprehensive level, discourse. Discourse is when sentences are combined into paragraphs, articles, books, conversations, and so forth. Understanding and producing language. Here's a true story. A man answers a phone call, listens for 5 seconds, and hangs up. It was a pre-recorded telemarketing call, he tells his wife. Some company called Press Grits. Press Grits? That's a weird name, she says. Then it dawns on her she is expecting an automated call from a company called Express Scripts to confirm an order. How can a voice on the phone say Express Scripts and the husband hear it as Press Grits? He simply failed to perceive the morpheme X, which left press for the first word. By saying Press Scripts rapidly, as the pre-recorded voice did, you'll realise that phonetically, Press Scripts and Press Grits are not far apart. Additionally, her husband had no context for interpreting the message. Context plays a key role in understanding language. This reminds me of when my mother-in-law took a call from what she said was Jamaican Apartments, and it was actually a real estate called Jim Aitken and Partners. The role of bottom-up processing. To understand language, your brain must recognise and interpret patterns of stimuli, which are the sounds of speech, shapes of letters, movements that create hand signs or tactile patterns of dots used in Braille that are detected by your sensory systems. And like other perceptual tasks, extracting information from linguistic stimuli involves the joint influence of bottom-up and top-down processing. In bottom-up processing, individual elements of a stimulus are analysed and then combined to form a unified perception. Analysing the hierarchical structure of spoken language as a set of building blocks that uses phonemes to create morphemes and then morphemes to create words reflects a bottom-up approach. As I'm reading this, specialised cell groups in my brain are analysing the basic elements, example contours and angles of lines, of the printed visual patterns that I see, and 2, feeding this information to other cell groups that lead me to perceive these patterns as letters. We then recognise the words which in turn become the building blocks for sentences, and sentences the building blocks for discourse. And discourse was basically what you get at the end. Once you put everything else together, then you can make combine sentences to make paragraphs and books and conversations, etc. But at every step in this bottom-up sequence, including pattern recognition, our understanding of language is also influenced by top-down processing. The role of top-down processing. In a farmer's market, there used to be a store called the bead store. The owners sold beads for making jewellery. Tourists would often walk by and ask, "Where's the bread?" The store's sign said bead, but many people perceived the word as bread, a function perhaps of their perceptual set, or their perceptual expectation, that they were in a farmer's market that sold food. Eventually, the owners put up a sign saying, "We don't sell bread." In top-down processing, sensory information is interpreted in light of existing knowledge, concepts, ideas, and expectations. As the bead store example illustrates, people looked at a stimulus pattern on a store sign that said bead, but bread is what they saw. Language by its very nature involves top-down processing because the words you write, read, speak, or hear activate and draw upon your knowledge of vocabulary, grammar, and other linguistic rules that are stored in your long-term memory. That's why if we write, "Bill, give the pencil to his friend," this sentence actually had missing letters, lots of missing letters. You can probably interpret the words with little difficulty. Bill gave the pencil to his friend, despite the absence of several bottom-up elements. Another example. Have you ever listened to someone speak a foreign language in which you aren't fluent and found that it was difficult to tell where one word ended and the next began? Conversely, non-English speakers would have the same problem listening to you speak. How is it then that in your native language this process of speech segmentation, which is perceiving where each word within a spoken sentence begins and ends, seems to occur automatically? When you read a sentence, the spaces between words make segmentation easy, but when people speak, they don't pause in between each pair of words. In fact, when people utter sentences, there is often more of a drop in sound energy between the segments within a word than between adjacent words. To illustrate, we say, "We hope you have a nice day," out loud. Did you distinctly segment each whole word, creating a sound energy break between each one? Or were your segments more like, "We hope you have a nice day"? Moreover, in English, about 40% of words consist of two or more syllables that are vocally stressed, i.e. emphasised, when spoken. Thus, in these and other words, the auditory breaks that we hear in speech often don't correspond well to the physical breaks produced by the spaces in written sentences. Psycholinguists have discovered that we use several top-down cues to tell when one spoken word ends and another begins. For example, through experience, we learn that certain sequences of phonemes are unlikely to occur within a single word. So when we hear these sounds in sequence, we are more likely to perceive them as a word ending and the beginning of an adjacent word. We also use the context provided by other words in a sentence to interpret the meaning of any individual word. So when people listen to a single spoken word, example ice, they have to identify it based on its sound alone. They perform more poorly than when they listen to the same word spoken within 2 to 4 word segments, example covered in ice. Pragmatics, the social context of language. Imagine that a passerby on the street asks you, "Do you have the time?" You say 10:20 and part ways. In this case, the question is really shorthand for, "I'm not wearing a watch, so please tell me what time it is right now." You wouldn't respond to someone's request, "Do you have the time?" merely by saying, "Yes, I do," and then walking away. Likewise, if a friend says, "I need you to explain this material to me, do you have the time?" You wouldn't say 10:20 and walk away. In this context, you understand that "do you have the time" means "can you take a few minutes to help me?" These examples illustrate that it takes more than having a vocabulary and arranging words grammatically to understand language and communicate effectively. It also involves pragmatics, which is a knowledge of the practical aspects of using language. Language occurs in a social context, and pragmatic knowledge not only helps you understand what other people are really saying, it helps you make sure that other people get the point of what you're communicating. Pragmatics is another example of how top-down processing influences language use. Many social rules guide communication between people. One rule states that messages should be as clear as possible. Depending on whether you're talking with an adult or a young child, you usually adjust your choice of words and sentence complexity. Pragmatics also depend on other aspects of the social context. When you write an essay, you would normally use a more formal tone than when writing an email to friends. Thus, when a university student sent an email to her lecturer that read, "I can't find tomorrow's assignment, could you please send it to me, please, could ya?" The lecturer sternly let the student know about her violation of pragmatics, namely, that the style of the message was inappropriate for the context.